will be watching this remotely, and that is totally fine. Remember, in the recording, you are so welcome to pause it at any point. As you may know or may not, I'm Liz Walhoff. I work for the Center for Professional Development, and this is...
I'm Tiffany Lychak, and I work with Liz at the Center for Professional Development.
And in the chat is Bob Madden, who also works at the same place, and he will be clarifying or asking questions as he deems appropriate. And yes, and he says hello. So the purpose of this webinar is for us to talk about teaching and learning e-portfolios. And we want to make sure that this is, that we are practicing what we preach, that we're modeling. So Tiffany, when you read these two enduring understandings, what comes to your mind?
The first one with connections, instigating transferability with relationship to e-portfolios is I really think on a number of different levels, they allow for different people to make connections to things that are posted in more of a body of evidence type fashion. Mm-hmm. I think that in general is just a good way for us to show connections between our learning in various ways. So I'm able to show more of a body of evidence of what I've learned through professional development because I have this bigger kind of broader picture mm-hmm. of what I've been doing. And I think it's easier to see the connections between those things when they're housed in a body of evidence such as an e-portfolio.
And I look at that in terms of SB 191 coming down the pike in 2014 and saying, how am I going to, and maybe this speaks to the next one a little bit, how am I going to communicate out to the world all the various things in which I'm involved?
Right.
So an e-portfolio lets me have one common place in which I can paint a picture of myself as an educator. I feel like my story is being told, whether I want it to be or not, by a variety of people. And I want to have my voice in that conversation. In the past, I have put information, work that I've done in a variety of other places in the district. And now I would rather have that work all be in one comprehensive body of evidence, right, like you said, and then I can link out.
Right. And I like your point about that communication part of it. I do think that what e-portfolios allow us to do, not just for teachers, but also for students if you're using these with kids, is they really allow you to tell a bigger, broader version of your story, like you were saying. So I kind of almost think of them as truly like a 3D resume, like a very mm-hmm. big and broad look at who I am as a learner mm-hmm. And also as a teacher. So not only are they useful for, documenting, holding evidence, but they really truly are that kind of bigger, broader look at who I am and what I represent. So I agree with you.
Which would be, as you said, equally important for students and for teachers in the classroom.
Absolutely.
So our outcomes for this webinar are for participants, as you watch this, to think about your own digital footprint and its strength, relative strength or weakness, if it's out there at all yet. To analyze the purposes of an e-portfolio and what that might mean for you, because depending on what you do, how you feel about your digital footprint, where you are based in terms of your site, you might have different purposes for this e-portfolio. And then to analyze the audience as well. There, as we talked about telling the story for ourselves or for students, it's important to consider who should be able to view what.
Absolutely. And I think by considering different audiences and adjusting or, talking to that last outcome, by considering different audiences, it also you take into consideration what sort of things do you want to have available in your e-portfolio.
What types of artifacts might be loaded into one.
Exactly.
So we hope that this webinar helps you consider those three things.
And just as a side note, had we had you guys here live in person, we would be asking you to post your thoughts on these in the chat box in terms of providing us some summative feedback, summative assessments to see how we're doing with meeting these outcomes. So,
but in the recorded version, as you watch through, you're going to be thinking about the outcomes and think about it in terms of measuring e-portfolios, in terms of measuring student learning, whether you are the student or the students in your actual classroom.
And Kif, by summative, you meant formative, right?
Well, it's kind of hard to do summatives in an hour-long webinar, so I think they're serving multiple purposes actually here. So with a short time period within an hour, the posting of thoughts in the chats are really what we're using as a summative. Also, the e-portfolio page that will come out of this webinar would be another summative measure, I think, of how well we've met our outcomes. So great point, Bob.
Hi, Peg.
Welcome, Peg.
We were just discussing the outcomes. We're going to move on to talk a little bit about the structure of this webinar. Feel free to jump in and ask questions as you have them. So our agenda for the webinar is to look at the broader purpose of an e-portfolio as part of a digital footprint, how you tell your story, and in a way, how you are measuring or documenting your learning. We're also going to model setting up of an e-portfolio and adding a course or a webinar, how you add that documentation to your e-portfolio, because sometimes that's that second piece that in which people get lost.
The third one is to talk about sharing of e-portfolios and some different ways that you can manage sharing with an e-portfolio. We know there's some concern about, well, how do I get certain people to see it and certain people only to see certain parts? So we'll kind of discuss the different ways that you can, share parts of it with everyone and parts of it not with so many people. And we'll make sure that we talk through the different methods of being able to kind of customize your sharing options within your e-portfolio.
And then we're also going to talk about some ways that you can help document some of your work as a teacher in terms of site evidence. And then the correlation with student learning would be, what might you want them to document as far as their own learning and evidence of their own proficiency? Peg, do you have any questions about that agenda before we move on?
And Peg, if this is if you don't have a lot of experience with webinar options, that chat box that's right below where our video pod is, you can click in the bottom part, type any questions, and use that little comment bubble to send them to us. So,
or just hit return and they'll come to us too.
Yeah, so as we go through, if you do have questions, please be sure to let us know.
So moving on to discuss digital footprint. So as we mentioned before, one of the main ideas for having this body of evidence for you as a student, or for your students in the classroom, or for you as a student and learner, is to be able to tell your story in your own words. Whether we like it or not, especially right now, there's a lot of discussion about education and teachers in particular and in general. And it's nice to be able to craft something that is discoverable online that tells your own story for who you are, what you value. And an e-portfolio can do that. Like Tiffany mentioned before, in some ways it can be almost like a 3D resume, or I think of it as like a portrait, an online portrait of what's valuable to me as an educator.
And I think that's a really important point to make too, is that it is our opportunity to really show all of the wonderful aspects of ourselves. And, I do think, unfortunately, that there's a lot of the negativity out there, and this is a great way for us to provide evidence of all the wonderful things that are really happening in our classrooms and with our teachers.
So it can be reflection and celebration, which could also be useful for you if, say, you had a spouse that transferred or for some reason you had to go somewhere else. It's great for hiring too. If you have all your stuff in one place that you can share with an open Gmail account, same for kids. If they have all of their stuff that they can share, it makes it easier for employers, for us, or for students to look at their work and say, hey, this is a person that I'm interested in. This is a person that I want to know more about.
I did want to stress what Liz said again, that sharing with the open Google account is really important for both teachers and students. I know there's been a lot of conversation with student portfolios about, well, what happens when they leave the district and they no longer have access to it? Well, the sharing with an open Google account, making that site an owner on that Google site will actually give them those rights to hold on to that site. So that's a great point. And I'm super excited that you brought that up.
So we want you to think for just a moment, and Peg, since you are the one in, you and Bob are the ones in the room right now, you may post, or if you'd rather just think privately, we don't want you to feel self-conscious about your thoughts being on the recording. But just think for a moment quietly, what do you think the postings on certain sites, like the ones that are bulleted below, Facebook, Twitter, websites, LinkedIn, email, even your email account, Pinterest, things like that, what do they say about you? What sort of picture do they paint about you as an educator? And I would also add to that, how much of it is you telling the story versus how much of it is somebody else telling your story? So we'll be quiet for a moment and let you do some thinking on that. So Peg, you're talking about how students can create their portfolios. So the process that we're going to show in just a minute for how you would create a portfolio as a teacher for in terms of documenting your own professional development is not dissimilar to what they would use. So continue to ask questions as we go through to make sure that we're hitting that side of the story.
And so just to touch on a couple of things that we're talking about in the back channel a little bit, the idea of, if we were to need to find a job somewhere else, and Liz, you mentioned the first thing that potential employer, or maybe it was Bob Moore, the first thing that employers do is they Google people to see what their digital footprint is. And so I think that's something that I'm constantly running through my head whenever I'm thinking about posting things on Facebook or on Twitter, is a potential employer or anyone who does a Google search on me, what sort of things pop up. So even if it's not posted to my wall, but I'm posting to, let's say, an open page, those comments are things that are Googleable and that people can find. And so what does that really portray me? So that's the filter of how does this portray me as a person and as a professional are always really important things that I consider.
And I think that's something that students are not used to necessarily thinking, depending on their age, are not used to necessarily thinking in those lights. But I know that college admittance groups look at that too. As they're reviewing who can get into what school, especially more prestigious schools, they are Googling their student applicants. So as students look at it, that's something that's wonderful for us to mention to them as they build their own body of evidence in terms of an e-portfolio, is what is it that what story are they telling about themselves?
Well, a lot of times I think our kids do think delete means that it's gone.
Oh, so not gone. No. So not gone.
The idea of a footprint is that it sticks,
yeah,
right?
Or they think that it's that they have set it as private, so nobody will be able to see it. And the private terms are a little bit relative, I would say, now, because things can be reposted by someone else or sent somewhere else. You once it's out there, you're not always necessarily in complete control of what it is. So it's really wise to be your best self online always, I think.
So I can't remember who it was. It was a computer tech teacher told me that they teach their kids to run it through. Is this something that you would want your grandma to read? And would she be okay with it?
Yes.
It's kind of a nice rule of thumb.
My grandma's a little spicier than I am. So
unless you have Liz's grandma.
One of my grandmas. So what we want to do is these are on the left are the things that we're going to show you how to do. We're going to take you through. We'll already be logged in to Google, but we're going to show you how to get to sites, how to choose create. Peg, as you were asking about for students, similar process. They're going to log into their Gmail first and then move over to sites. Even if they don't have Gmail, if they're a student who at your school doesn't receive Gmail, they can still log into their Google account. Then move over to sites. They're going to choose the create option. Now we are going to have teachers browse the template gallery for the PD portfolio. But students could just hit create and they could go blank, or they could look at a template that they like.
Yeah, you could always make a template for them to use if there's certain things you want them to include.
Yep, especially if you had younger students for whom the whole setup process was longer. You might want to populate a little bit of that content already for them and then make it a template. And then we're going to show about naming. So we'll be modeling this as if it were on the teacher end, but it's a very, very similar process on the student end. We do have some resources for you. There's a one-pager and a sites tutorial that we can show you, and we'll ask Bob to see if he can't get some of those in the chat. And then we're going to stop sharing this PowerPoint now and show you how to do those things.
Okay, so in order to create a teacher website, I'm going to back up just a little bit here. What we would need to do is sign into the Google domain, our Google domain, as we were mentioning, and that can be any email or docs, any of the Google products that we have in our domain. And then you're going to want to use the sites option to get into your sites area. So I'll wait for that to load. From here, in order to create a site from our template, there's an option on the left, a red button that says create. We're going to click on that.
And then remind me to have you go back to that list so that we can talk about that before we're done.
Sure. And then we get two options here. We have a blank template and then browse the gallery for more. In this case, because we do have a teacher ePortfolio template that's already been created, we're going to browse that gallery to find it. And we can use the search option in here to type in PD portfolio.
Or you can just look in the queue. It's popular enough that it's usually the first one or two toward the top.
And once we click there, you can see it gives us the option down here to preview the template. So we're going to go ahead and click on preview. This is going to look slightly different on your screen because I'm actually the owner of the template, so it looks a little bit different. However, you still have the option up here at the top where it says use this template.
And so for you all, since you're not the owners on it, you would see a use this template button. Also, if you were to go back, you could scroll down and there's a select button that you can choose as well. Either one will get you to the same place.
So we're going to go ahead and click on use this template. And you can see now in the screen that we previously were at, we have another box that's added that says PD portfolio underneath it that's highlighted in like a red outline. So we know that that's the one that we've selected. And we're going to name our site
with your first name and your last name. And then you can call it either Teaching and Learning ePortfolio or you can call it PD portfolio. Either one works.
The key thing is that you want to name it what you want to name it. Because even though you can kind of change the name on the site, the URL stays the same.
Yes, so try to
double
look
check
for
your
typos,
spelling.
things like that.
Okay, so that looks good. And we're going to click on create. And I hope I don't have one already named that somewhere.
We'll find out.
I might.
I think you did this one just as portfolio instead of ePortfolio, so that's good.
I think it had a dash in it too, or my middle initial or something.
There you go.
Okay.
So this is what you would see as a regular, once you've created the site from the template. Now for students, if they were making a site and it wasn't from a template, they would just get a blank home page to start, but they would still get these same editing options up here on the right. And one of the things that we promised to show you right off the bat was how to share. And we're going to...
can we stop for 1 second?
Yes.
With Bob's comments, we did want to address those, that when you do create your site, that you use your full first and last name.
Yes.
It makes it easy for folks in our office who are processing PGIs, if you're participating in those, to find you, as well as
digital footprint.
And your digital footprint also. No initials and no nicknames. And that's exactly what Bob's point was. It will help our office staff immensely, and it will also help you be able to be found out there in a positive manner.
Yes. I'm lucky because my last name is unusual enough.
Yeah, I kind of got that double whammy.
You know, the Liz, Elizabeth. I go by Liz a lot, but people still find me pretty easily because of the last name. So looking back at the site and at the share option, I am not 100% sure if this is the same in the student domain, but certainly in our teacher domain, the default is people at Douglas County School District can find and edit. And you might not actually want your students, say, for example, if you taught middle school, to be in there and able to find and edit your site. So we recommend that you begin with clicking on that. And then we're going to back it up a little bit. And then do you see where it says Douglas County School District can find and edit? We're going to click on change. And then this is where you have a personal preference deal. Mine is public on the web because I don't care. It's part of my digital footprint. I do that deliberately. However, some people who have a lot of their evaluation information on there or whatever, they might want it to be more private. You could share it to anyone with the link, which is more like an unlisted phone number. People at Douglas County School District, so you would have to log into Douglas County Google to be able to see it. That's another option. Even more like an unlisted phone number, but within Douglas County School District, or you can set it as private for now while you're getting used to the idea. Any of those are fine. As you noticed, if you choose one of the top four, you get an access drop-down menu, which says people can find it or can view it or can edit depending on where you are. So we can set it. How do you want to set this one? To private for now? Or?
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Okay, she's going to do it. Anyone with the link can view. And then she's going to click on the green save button. And then also, if you are a teacher and you're using this for PGI, you have to add two ladies from our office who are fabulous gals. Anita Gregg, that's 2 G's on the, well, 3 total on the last name, and Renee Hoyt.
This would also be, so I'm going to go ahead and share it with Renee.
But this would also be a good place where you would probably put your evaluator.
Your evaluator. The other option too to point out is you really want to make sure that they're not editing it, that they can just view it.
So you can set it in view. Although honestly, Anita and Renee have plenty to do. They're not going to mess with it.
So the other thing that I would, or your evaluator. That's okay. The evaluator part, I think so as well, but this is where I would also share it with that open Gmail account. And here, instead of just edit rights, this is where I actually want to make the open Gmail account an owner.
That way, if your Douglas County email account were to go away, maybe you left the district because of a relocation or whatever, then your other Gmail account would be the owner and have full access to it and be able to continue with it.
Exactly.
Again, same thing, kind of thing you might want to do with students who are a little bit older. If they're putting all this time, blood, sweat, and tears into this, they may want to have it shared with their open Gmail account so that they can keep it as they go.
And I'll share it with my evaluator.
Okay, good deal.
All right.
All right. Then once you're on this page, you might be wondering, well, how do I get back? So in the upper left, you'll see the name of your site with a left-facing arrow. You click on that, and that's how you get back to that. So essentially, at this point, you have a skeleton set up. Ours has content already pre-populated. Again, you could make a template for your students and pre-populate it with certain content. Or they could just start from scratch, same type of deal. Can you, before we go back to our PowerPoint, can you go back to where it says create a new site in DCSD?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to mention something because we get a lot, say cancel, and go back to the queue that has all of the Douglas County sites listed. I want to mention that this is something that we have people ask us about quite often.
Not this one, you want the template?
No, right here.
Okay.
People ask, how can they, and I'm gesturing like you can see that I'm doing that, how can I get sites that I love to show up in this queue? And really the only things that show up there are things that are directly shared with you, and they're listed in alphabetical order.
That you have editing rights
that
on
you
shared
have,
with you, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah?
But they have entered you in under add people or whatever it might be. They've given you edit rights to those things. So that's why those are in there. So for people like Tiffany and I, ours end up being kind of long. However, for other people, they would say, how do I get stuff in there? And you really don't. If it's something that you don't own or can't edit, then you have to just bookmark it like you would any other website that you want to go back to. The other thing that I wanted to mention is if you want to zoom in on the URL, Kif, if you're a teacher and you're using this with students work, even if they've shared it with you, do not show up there. So you just change the URL just slightly, and you go to sites.google.com/a/ and then just add this s dot like Tiffany is doing. And then when you hit return, you see the list of any student created sites that are shared with you. So that s dot after the a/a or /a/ is,
and that is really important
for people to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because otherwise they're going to be looking for their kids' sites, their student sites, and they're not going to see it.
In the staff bucket. You got to be in the kids bucket to see the kids stuff.
Even if it's been shared directly with you. So they are kind of kept just slightly different.
And are we going to talk a little bit more about our course? Is this the appropriate place to talk about our building and maintaining a portfolio course, or are we doing that later? Okay. So just wanted to mention, while we have the template page open from the home page, there is a link to our DCSD Moodle course, which the fabulous Bob Madden has designed. That course will help walk you through a lot of what we've done today. It has great help videos, great resources that you can use. And it also earns you 2 hours of credit towards a PGI. So it is a PGI eligible course and can walk you through that. It's a great resource also if you need to go back and review how to do something. It's a wonderful resource to have available for that.
And thanks to Sarah Spillin also for some of those videos. Those are very useful, and it's nice to have them just in a one-stop shop. Now, as Google is, things always do change as far as layout, so occasionally you might see something that looks just a wee bit different if Google from one week to another has changed something and we haven't had a chance to update the videos yet. But we also have some how-to Google Sites instructions that Tiffany is mousing over that you could click and look at. Especially there are certain pages kind of in the 8-9 range and toward the very bottom that are useful for you as you talk about content. We also do have, it's full right now, but we'll be opening another section, especially if you get me a host school, of a building and populating your ePortfolio course. It is not a PGI eligible course, but it's more like a guided lab. So we'll show you some things, and it's a 4-hour course typically happening on a Saturday morning that talks you through, okay, here are some things that you could do, now go work, now come back, here are some more things that you could do, up to you. And it's just to help people out in case this is not quite enough. And it is a face-to-face, real live person type course.
Wonderful.
Let's go back and look at our next agenda items here in Adobe Connect. We're going to stop sharing for just a moment. All right, so we've gone through all of these things. Next, we want to talk a little bit more about populating it. But before we do, Peg, if you have any questions, just as a reminder, feel free to add those into the chat. And then we are going to talk about how do you make new pages for PGI eligible courses for staff. And then you can also make new pages. How would a student make a new page for whatever they were trying to document? We're also going to talk about how to add content, and we're going to highlight adding content for staff, but it's a very, very similar process for students. How to add pages to your navigation. There's a harder way and an easier way that we learned recently. And then we talked already about the sharing, so that's sort of off the list.
Okay, so we're going to go back out.
And here we are on our sample ePortfolio. Tiffany, at my school, we did the backward planning overview course.
Okay.
Now, as evidence, so I can get my PGI, I have to make a backward planning overview page, and I have to put my backward plan into it. Can you help me do that?
Absolutely. So the first thing that you would do in your site is you need to create a new page. This icon up here at the top that looks like a little page with a plus sign is the Make Me a New Page button.
And you can tell usually by mouse, if you mouse over it for a little while, usually you'll see that come up. Since we're zoomed in, you're not seeing it, but there is usually a little text box that comes up and says Add Page in case you forget what the icon means. Or you can just click on it and get it.
Oh,
there's the new page icon.
Okay. And from here, I'm going to call this BP Overview. And I'm also going to put the number of hours in parentheses for PGI eligible courses.
Just to make it easier for you and for our staff in terms of adding up to that 15.
Exactly. So the backward planning overview is an 8-hour course plus an hour for me to create my portfolio page. So this counts for 9 hours.
Okay.
Okay.
And do you have to worry about what template to use or just say create?
Well, in this case, there's not a template for the overview course. There's specific things that I have to put on that page. But notice if I click on the drop-down arrow, there's some other stuff in here, like the stage 1 webinars, for example, or stage 2 for ours today. I would actually choose a stage 2 webinar template for today.
So maybe we'll do that a little bit later.
Yeah. So I would just use a random normal old web page.
All right.
And I'm going to go ahead and just leave it at the top level.
Yep.
That's fine.
We're going to handle the navigation in a minute.
Create.
And then I noticed that it loads automatically into the editing view, which is good. For some people on their browsers, it takes a little longer than others, so you just be patient.
And then I would start typing in the evidence for my backward planning overview course. And I continue to type, put in any documentation that I like. If I have stuff in Google, I can provide links to it or embed Google Documents here by using the insert.
Show me how to do that.
Sure. It's actually a really handy, cool way to show things. So I can do this insert document option. And it's going to pull up a list of everything I have in Google that's available. So if I wanted to insert, for example, we're going to pretend that this change agent.
Well, you have a backward plan. Do the one for your change agent 1.0.
Let's see.
You could use the search feature if you had a lot of Google Docs.
That's right. And look up here. That's right there. Let's do change agent 1.0.
All right.
And there's the backward plan.
The backward plan.
So I'm going to select that.
And then this little box, do you really have to worry about it?
I don't really worry about it too much. You can leave them on, but I typically uncheck them because the text above usually explains what's there, but not a big deal. You can leave them. And it looks kind of funky.
Yeah, it didn't work. What's up with that?
Well, this is actually Google's way of showing you it's there. Once I hit save, then we're going to notice that in just a moment that it shows up. The great thing about this that I really like about the idea of embedding a Google Doc onto the page is I can control who sees that document. So maybe my portfolio is open on the web, but I've only granted viewing rights to the document to my evaluator, certain people that I want to be able to share it with.
So this would be really useful in terms of showing student work or for students showing their work, because you don't want to violate FERPA.
Right.
But they could have an e-portfolio that has parts of it that are open to the whole world. And then it could, sorry, I need to snuggle more. It has parts of it that are open to the world, but if this Google Doc were not also shared with the world,
right,
then somebody from the outside could look at it and they would see the text, the evidence for my backward planning overview course, but they wouldn't be able to see anything in this gray square.
That key that says you do not have permission to see this. So that's an easy way to manage your sharing, is by using the insert Google Doc option.
But it's important to know then also, if your backward planning overview instructor or your restorative practices instructor or whoever it might be, it is looking at your evidence, you have to make sure to share your Google Doc with them as well as the e-portfolio, both.
Right. They need to have access to both things.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I want to go back in and make any other changes, I just use the pencil up here next to my new page icon, and that's going to allow me to make more changes.
And what I like about the document being represented by this square is that then if I want to type, I don't have to kind of scroll around the document. I can just click to the right of it and then hit return, and yeah, it makes it really easy. So I can kind of see why they did it from that standpoint. What if I accidentally had selected the wrong Google Doc? How do I get rid of this one?
Oh, so when I click on it, on that box that's the placeholder for the doc, I get some options up here. There's an X right there, which is remove. And again, if you kind of mouse over stuff, it'll let you know what the option is. So you can wrap text around it. It has alignment tools. And if you ever wanted to check the properties in terms of the title or how big it is, you can always go back and change those as well.
All right.
Yeah. So one other interesting point to make, down here at the bottom, there's also an option to add files. So let's say I don't have my stuff in Google. I can actually click on that button and upload Word documents.
Or PDF.
Or PDF.
Whatever it might be. Excellent. Yeah. So, and students could do that too.
Students could do that too. Yep. The one thing we may want to point out just very quickly is if you don't see that option to add a file at the bottom, underneath this More menu, there is an option for page settings.
It's the fourth one down.
Right here. I'm going to scroll in a little bit. When you click on that, you're going to notice some of the options that I have turned on right now are to allow comments and also to allow attachments.
So a student, for example, may not want to allow comments depending on who they're sharing with, or they might not want to allow attachments, but they could decide. Another thing that I notice here is how to make that page show up in your sidebar. How easy is that? So you went to More, Page Settings, and maybe you wanted it under PGI 1. When you click that and say Save, let's see what happens. Dating us, you want to put the webcam back up? You know, I honestly have to say that having no audience has never really stopped us from being able to just enjoy talking about things randomly.
Totally fine.
So this is probably representative. She had magical.
Well, then we were pretty much where we are
now.
So
pretty much the other thing that we were saying is in the ePortfolio course, it tells you to put your building and maintaining your ePortfolio course page in under PGI 1, but really you can put it under 1 or 2, wherever it makes most sense for you mathematically to add up to 15. So that's from the teacher lens. For students, again, they can just go into that page settings and they could divide out. They could have a section for different content areas, different classes they were in. So that navigation, they can build out the navigation and then use that page settings to go wherever it is that makes sense. Yes, you can totally switch things from 1 to 2 as long as you've not submitted your "I'm done, please give me credit for my PGI form" yet.
How? Sure.
Excellent. Good question.
Okay.
So let's say that you wanted to put backward planning overview in PGI 2. First, you go to the page, the backward planning overview page, click on that, and then under more, go to page settings, fourth one down, uncheck PGI 1, add a check for PGI 2, and say save. And then if we pull it back just a little bit more, you'll see it makes that swap. Does that seem doable? Yeah, it's easy, huh? It used to be a lot harder.
So much easier.
Yeah, it used to be a lot harder in Google. So should we look back in Adobe Connect out our next set of agenda items? So we went through those things, added some new content. You know what we did not do is we did not show people how to document the webinar.
For today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we wait and do that at the very end?
Yeah, why don't we do that at the very end?
People can do it with us?
Yeah,
all right.
We'll do it all together at the end.
And then we already went through how the default is anyone can find and edit, and that's probably not optimal.
Right.
We talked about sharing with Anita and Renee, and we mentioned in passing that whoever is the instructor for your course needs to have shared with them not only any materials that you add to the page, but also your ePortfolio in general. That you might want to have your administrator on there depending on the site because it is part of your body of evidence. And you might want it to be shared to the world because then it's part of your body of evidence in your digital footprint. Same type of deal for students. They might want to share with specific teachers that they have. They might want to share with colleges.
Employers.
They might want that to be the body of evidence for them as learners, or they might want it to be more limited and more private. Oh, you just stop. I'm allowed to have my nose itch, so there. Stop it, Mr. Bob. All right, so some of those sharing considerations like we were talking about. Tell me a little bit about FERPA.
Well, FERPA laws are really about privacy and protecting kids to make sure that we're doing the right thing. One thing that I always make sure we tell teachers when they're thinking specifically about students and using ePortfolios is to check their media release forms that their parents have filled out to see what permission they have. They've given us to post things out on the web. So if you have a media release form that the parents have asked nothing, no student work to be posted on the web, they obviously cannot create a Google site that's open out there on the world for everybody to see. So those FERPA considerations are really all about privacy laws that protect our kids and their information.
Yeah. So one of the things to consider is whether or not, and COPA I think is similar in terms of child online protection, whatever it all is. And it talks about how students are students of a certain age are not able to have certain types of accounts. Now in our district, you know that K-12, we have Google accounts for all of our students. That was because we were allowed to, as a district, act as the agent for the parents, and then parents were allowed to opt out if they chose. So each school has individual settings, so some schools might have certain things turned off for certain grade levels and turned on.
Or sharing only within the district, but maybe not to the wide world.
Exactly. So as you think about sharing and materials, it's important for you to know what's accessible at your school as well. And if something that you know you want or need is accessible, is not accessible, then you need to know who to have that conversation with, usually your administrator.
And your CRT, maybe, your CRT, technical person in your building.
Just be clear to them as far as what you're trying to do and why. And I would also say be transparent with parents. If you're going to, I have 3 kids in our schools already and one more who will be hitting them before too long. I do have my students' information a little bit limited, but whenever the teacher has come to me and said, we're doing this specific thing, for this purpose, I've been like, sure, I just want to be in the loop. So that's why I had done that. Now I know we don't have the media release form in the same way as we used to in the past, but still I think it's important to keep parents in the loop so they can celebrate with you. Comfort level is also another thing.
Huge thing.
Yeah, because for me, I have mine open on the web. It's sort of how I am. I don't really have a lot of interesting secrets that people could find anyway. But If I were just new to ePortfolios and I were just starting it, I might want to keep it private and just have it limited to specific people. Mm-hmm. Or I might want to just have it limited to my team and my department and my administrator. Those are all perfectly fine. You just have to decide what that means for you, what you're comfortable with, and what that means for your digital footprint as far as people knowing your story. Either way, it's totally up to you.
The other point that you made a little bit earlier, Liz, when we were first talking about creating them is I think it's sometimes a good idea to keep them maybe locked down in private while you're working on the creation part and just sharing them with specific people. Specifically taking into account that digital footprint, so when you're publishing them out on the Wide Web, you have a more polished product that you're putting out for people to see.
Right, and some people are comfortable with a little bit more in process being visible to everybody. Other people want it to be perfect before it's visible. It's totally up to you. Yeah. And then on copyright and fair use, if you do choose to set something as very, very visible, please make sure that any images that you use or any videos that you use are appropriate to be used, that you've searched and gotten permission to use them if they're from somebody else, or that you did advanced search settings in Google and you looked for things that were free to reuse and share. So we just don't want anybody to end up with someone unhappy with them because of you using their materials when you weren't intending to do anything.
And most likely, people are very, very friendly. Usually when you ask, for example, with this webinar, one of the images that we used from portfolios and how they share content and those sort of things, we found on a website from the University of Edinburgh. And so we asked, so I've made these great contacts with these lovely people in Scotland now who were more than happy to share as long as we asked and attributed it to their site. So in our presentation notes, you can see from this presentation, we're trying to model correct copyright use.
Good use.
Yes.
And so this goes back to the discussion, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. What works well for teachers can also work really well for kids, and what works well for kids can also work well with teachers. So let's take a minute to think, how might we connect the learning about teacher e-portfolios to students' body of evidence? Peg, I know that was something that you were particularly interested in. Have you had any thoughts on that you would be willing to post in the chat? For those of you who are watching the recording at home, take a minute to think about what considerations or what might this mean for me as a teacher, and then could this work for my students? Depending on the grade level, the ability, the type of students you have, it may or may not be appropriate, but think about it. And
thinking about it too, I did want to point out that we have some of our youngest learners in the district. We have kindergartners who are working with support, obviously, to create e-portfolios that will follow them, hopefully K through 12, but certainly K through 6 in the building they're currently in.
So Prairie Crossing, for example, where every child has one, and it's just part of their student body of evidence as they go on.
Do we want to give some thought time for that?
Peg will give you a minute to think, and as we're thinking, if you want a little bit more time on your own as you're watching the recording, then by all means feel free to pause the recording here. Spend some time thinking about it. I will spend some time thinking about why there is
Peg, you're it for the live attendees, but we do know that there are a lot of folks who watch the archive version of the webinar, so we're kind of double talking. So for you and also for
people who will be watching the recording. That's one of the.
But we're more than happy to be here with just you and Bob today.
Yes, yes, we would do it even if it were just for you two. Yep. Well, we love you both. You're both very quality people. Well, we love you, Peg, and there's Bob too. No, and Bob totally helped plan this.
He did help plan it.
Yeah, we happen to be the faces behind it today for various different reasons, but he was right in there with us. So kudos and credit to Bob, who I just feel the need to pick on sometimes. So in terms of documenting learning from this, it is a stage 2 webinar. Let's go through the process. And Peg, if you want to follow along, if you already have an e-portfolio set up, you are welcome to do that. And stop us at any point if you have questions. Those of you who are watching the recording, feel free to pause it at appropriate points.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to share my desktop so you guys can see.
See it in action.
Peg's got her set
Oh,
already.
yay, way to go, you. So you can follow along if you want to minimize Adobe Connect and come join us on this.
So we're back in our ePortfolio.
And this is for any webinars.
Any webinars. Just it's important to kind of consider which sort of webinar you're watching, because we have stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3s. If you're not sure, there is actually on the District Learning and Leadership website a list of those webinars and which category they belong to.
But it's also easy to look at them in terms of time frame. Anything that happened last semester was supposed to be focused roughly around stage 1. January to February is stage 2, and then the rest of the school year will be stage 3 webinars. So that, if that calendar helps you a little bit.
So we will go ahead and, to document for today, we're going to create a new page. And I'm going to title this. Now I'm going to be very careful with the naming of this in order to make it easy for our office staff to line up the name of the webinar, with the name of the webinar on my transcript, because those two things have to line up. So I'm going to call this
Teaching and Learning ePortfolios.
And Learning ePortfolios.
And then having that date.
The date is really important.
Because then even if there was something wrong with the name,
13, they can use that date
figure it out by the date. Yep. Did you want to put 1 hour on there?
Oh yeah. I'm going to actually add in that 1 hour.
And then,
and I'm going to actually, now I'm going to use a different template other than a blank web page, because we actually have, let's see, here's a stage 2 webinar documentation. So I'm going to click on that.
Because this is the January to February webinar.
And create.
And does it matter if I were to watch this webinar in April, would I still use stage 2?
Yep, you're still going to use stage 2 because we're actually presenting the webinar as a stage 2 webinar.
During the screening time. All right, it has content on the page already. What do I need to keep? What can I delete?
So let's see, it says delete this text and type the name of the webinar here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this text, and we're going to call it Teaching and Learning ePortfolios. And I'm going to put the date there too. Right?
Sure.
Don't you think? 2/5/13.
You already have it in the title.
Mine as well.
So it's okay.
And then there's also a note here that says if you're not sure what it was called, please refer to this list. And I'm going to go ahead and click on that just to kind of show folks where that goes. This is going to take you out to our Learning and Leadership webinar calendar. And from here, you can see all of the different things that are linked.
The titles and the dates in particular are really important.
So this will help you see where you need to go. Or which category your webinar belongs to.
Oh, as far as if it's stage 1 or 2 or whatever.
So if we can look right now and see our CPD one for February, Teaching and Learning ePortfolios, is in fact a stage 2 assessment webinar.
Yep. Because it's all about how you could document learning. All right, so then we could delete this if you're not sure what it was called. I bet we could also even delete that highlighted text up above the webinar name.
Yeah, we don't really
And it is a little redundant to have the webinar name listed twice. So if you miss that, it's no big deal. As long as it's in the title of the page, you're good. And then it looks like there are 3 questions that a person needs to answer. The first one talks about how did the webinar change or enhance your understanding of measuring student learning. So this would be talking about ePortfolios as a body of evidence, and it could be with yourself as a learner. And you would fill in however, or as a boy of evidence if you prefer.
Those ones too.
All right. And then what questions do you still have? And you would just answer that. KIF's changing the colors, but you don't have to. It's up to you. It does make it a little nicer to read. All right. And then was there anything that you had expected to learn about in this webinar but didn't? And then you could fill that out. And obviously you would probably do, we are not asking for a doctoral thesis here. If you do a few sentences on each, just be thoughtful as you reflect. That's what we're really asking for. Then say save. And now, Tiffany, remind me, I want to put this under PGI 1.
Okay.
How do I do that without suffering great pain?
So if I want to put this under PGI number 1, the quickest and fastest way to do that is using that More menu and then Page Settings.
Absolutely.
And by clicking on the box show this page in the sidebar under, I want it under PGI number 1.
Yes.
And then I'm going to click on save.
All right. And then how soon will something like this show up on my transcript?
You know, it depends on how fast paperwork moves. For the webinars, they're checked, I think, twice a month. Is that right?
Every 2 weeks or so.
Probably 2 or 3 weeks at the most. Once you complete the evidence in your webinar page, you're also going to need to register in the course catalog.
So can you show me how to do that?
Yeah, I can show you how to do that. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. One of the you can do it 2 ways. You can go to the course catalog, or you can also go to the Learning and Leadership website. So we'll course catalog for today because, well, actually, let's do Learning and Leadership website.
Okay.
So in order to get to that Learning and Leadership website, I think it's probably a good idea that we send people all to the common place. I'm going to go back to my list of Google sites.
Okay.
And where that drop-down arrow is, I'm going to choose Search All Sites there.
Okay.
And then I'm going to type in Learning and Leadership.
I always type in DCSD Learning.
Oh, DCSD Learning?
Yeah, that's
Let's
what
try
I do.
that.
DCSD
Learning. Okay. And then we're going to use the little search icon.
And you get a bunch of gobbledygook, but you want the thing that's in the blue.
Right here up at the top, so we're going to click right there. And from here on the left-hand side, this site has a ton of great information about all the major things that are happening right now with the Learning and Leadership groups. But towards the bottom of the navigation, there's 2 links. One is the Learning and Leadership webinar series, and this is a calendar along with links to enter the meeting rooms. So this is kind of, I think of this as more the live webinar area. And then we also have this archived webinars link.
Okay.
And there's some directions at the top that explain in more detail again what we're going to do. And then once we're done here today, Bob Madden will create a link right here. So let's go down to the February area that will say recording. That's you, Bob Madden. It'll say recording, and when you click on that, it'll actually take you out to a Moodle course that explains to you the process, all the steps we just did, as well as a link to register for it in the course catalog.
And that's at the very bottom of that
at the very bottom.
So again, we went to our Google Sites. We searched for DCSD Learning under all sites, not under my sites.
So we're changing that to all sites. DCSD Learning.
And we see a bunch of crazy stuff, but then there will be a blue box up at the top. We click on that, scroll way down. Tiffany, what happens? Well, maybe not that way down.
Not that far. Okay, there we go.
What happens if I can't see that archived webinar link? Where could it be hiding?
Oh, that's true. If you have this menu over here collapsed, you can click on that little arrow to drop it down. There is also, however, if you can only see that first webinar series page, there's a link at the very top of that page to get you to the archived webinar page. So.
And then I scroll down to the webinar that I took. I can ignore the conversation up at the top, but that does refresh my memory on how to go through that process.
And how often credits granted, all of that. So that information.
And then I look for that word recording. Let's click on one that's already been done.
So let's click on the one for authentic assessments with technology.
And that one looks like it needs to be a login option. And I'm sensing that Bob is going to be changing that so that guest access is just fine. Otherwise, you can use your single sign-on. And then up at the top in the first little block before the number 1 is a link to the archive. But if you watched it live, you don't need to do that. And then number 2 talks about what you have to do, but you've probably already done that, or number 1 does. And then number 2 talks about how to register, and there's a link that you click. That'll take you to the course catalog for this specific webinar, for that specific webinar, and you just look at it, and then you choose the option of registering, theoretically. So to view the archived webinar, click here, and this one looks like, of course, since we are live and recording, we got the one without the register button.
We will make sure that we get that solved.
Yep.
Yes.
But traditionally, there would be
a register
button there.
That is correct.
All right.
Okay.
So we are at 5:27. Let's take a look back at our presentation. And Peg, feel free to ask any questions that you have. So Just as a little bit of a review, and then we'll post the link for the evaluation. I'm hoping that Bob Madden will do that. We'll post the link for the evaluation in the chat. E-portfolios are great for teachers and students' digital footprints. The
ability to tell your story, yourself, your words.
Yep, yourself, your words. The purposes of an e-portfolio for teachers would be?
There's various ones. I think there's a number of things right now. It's great for documenting evidence of my learning and my growth, number one. It also serves for a variety of audiences. We talked about that a little bit. So it can really be that 3D resume that's out there online that shows who I am. If I'm looking to present at a big conference, for example, I would much rather have people be able to use that well-rounded look at me rather than just what I can write in one paragraph.
Yes.
So there are tons of different purposes depending on really what your audience is, but that idea of it being a really 3D look at who I am as a professional is really kind of how I would sum that up in one sentence.
And it's also good for PGI, documenting PGI eligibility so that you can get your stipend, and some schools are using it for sight. For students, a great way to document their growth, almost as a digital running record of them as a student. Audiences for teachers' e-portfolios can vary. Some you mentioned, participants at a conference.
Your administrator, even, your local team. So maybe you guys are sharing resources via Google Sites. It's a great place to house those resources that you share through a department, or even a district focus group for content areas. You know, we both come from a secondary background. I think that would be a neat way for foreign language teachers to share resources.
Or if you're at an elementary level, maybe you're a specials teacher, you're the only one of you in your building, and you want to collaborate with other specials teachers. Maybe you put up some of your resources and share that with other people who teach your content area. Maybe there are other PE teachers or other music teachers, and then they can share back with you too. For students' e-portfolios, it can be anywhere from other students in the class, that limited, or just the teacher if you wanted to be even more limited. But it could include people as far-flung as students at different schools in different countries, grandma and grandpa, mom and dad,
colleges
for older
applications,
students, future employers, making them Googleable. So depending on what grade level you teach, your audience can be incredibly broad. And we're at 5:29. Perfect
so
for us
to go ahead and grab the evaluation.
Yep. And then Peg, do you have any closing questions before we sign out? We've put the evaluation in the chat. No worries.
It was very nice to have you here today, Peg. Thank you for coming.
To meet you digitally.
Yes.
Bob, I see that you're typing. If you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in there. If you're watching the recording, we appreciate you taking time to watch it.
You can always email us with questions.
Yep. And